Whiteboard.fi is one of several available websites that allows you to use mini whiteboards like you would in the classroom. At the moment, I'm finding that I have a lot of classes that are quite reluctant to answer questions in the chat in front of each other, either because they're not sure if they're right or not and that makes them anxious, or just because they don't want to be seen to be answering questions. So having all of the pupils responding on mini whiteboards means I can see who's struggling and who understands. They're also particularly useful when I'm covering a class, because if I invite the children in a different class into my meeting, then because they're not part of that team, they can't see the chat. And that means that I can't ask them to type answers in the chat, I can't use forms, I can't use polls. Whereas if I'm using whiteboards, then I can just scan and see who knows what the answer is. When you sign up for an account, it can take a really long time for the confirmation message to come through, but actually you don't need it, because if you click New up here on the home page, you can launch a new whiteboard room without having an account at all. If you do make an account, then you get a dashboard screen like this from which you can make rooms for your whiteboards. There are free accounts and paid for accounts, but as far as I can tell, the only advantages of a paid for account are that you can have one permanent address where your whiteboards will always appear, and that you can invite other teachers to share your teacher screen. When you click Create New Room, you'll see a new screen that looks like this. From here, you just click Create Temporary Room and it will create a room that will stay open as long as you're using it, and then for 2 hours afterwards. Once you've created the room, you'll be given a code for it, and pupils can access this either by clicking on it or typing it in, or by going to the whiteboard.fi homepage and then entering the last 5 digits there. It's worth familiarising yourself with all the different tools that are available to you. So, you can select objects and move them. You can draw, which is particularly useful if you have a graphics tablet available. If you're drawing, then you can also change the colour and the weight. You can type, which I recommend that most pupils do. You can insert an image, and I use this for when I'm going to ask questions. For asking questions like this, I would tend to use a form rather than the whiteboards, but there are 2 reasons I'm going to use a form here. The first one is if I'm teaching a cover lesson and some of the pupils who are there can't access the chat, so it's hard to direct them to a form because I can't put the link in there. The other reason is if we're about to do a big piece of work on the whiteboard, because I can't access the pupils' whiteboards unless they've moved their mouse recently. So quite often I'll pose a question like this, because that will then make sure that they all go there and they all look at it and they're all moving their mouse, and then that will then allow me to take ownership of their whiteboards. In order to do this, what I tend to do is have my questions on my PowerPoint slide, and then you can save your PowerPoint as a JPEG, and it will ask you how many slides do you want to export, and you say just this one. So I'll then have those questions as a picture. This also has the advantage that it means I can keep the same questions up on my PowerPoint slide in the Teams meeting, so if for whatever reason someone can't get into the whiteboards, they can still see what the rest of us are working on at the same time. When I go to my whiteboard, I can then insert that picture, and then I can choose to push to students current page only. You can push all the pages at once, but I tend to find it's better to have all of my diagrams or all of my questions lined up and then push it a page at a time. When you click that push button, whatever is on your whiteboard will then go to each of the pupils' whiteboards so that they can see what you want them to, and they can then respond to that. If you're wanting to do something more real time, say if you're drawing a diagram or annotating something, then they can click this toggle button at the top, and that will allow them to see exactly what you're drawing on your whiteboard as you're drawing it without you needing to push it to them. If you're getting ready for the lesson and you want to upload multiple different sets of questions or diagrams beforehand, then you can keep adding pages by clicking this plus here, and then you can choose which ones to push to students when. If pupils are inactive for 5 minutes or more, then their connection will pause. They'll see a screen that looks like this and they need to click to reconnect. Until they do that, you won't be able to push any diagrams or anything like that to them, which is why I tend to give some instructions to do something on the whiteboard right before I want to push something that they're actually going to work on. If you're teaching the same lesson to multiple different classes, or maybe if you're using a diagram that you're going to refer back to over several lessons, then you can save your current whiteboard to your library so that if you do have an account, you can go back and revisit it later. Another option on the menu is to add emojis, and there's a whole range available, so I quite often use these in either the starter slide or the plenary slide to say something about tell me how you're feeling about this topic. And finally, here are a couple of quick examples of what it actually looks like to me as the pupils are working. So you can see what everybody's writing in real time, and it gives you an indication of who's coping and who's really not. Here's another example from my Year 10s. They were given the scaffold of the basic molecules without anything added into them, and then they've been asked to fill in the dots and crosses as we learn to draw the various diagrams. You can see there's a fair amount of variation in how far they've got, and you can also see that a couple of them have become inactive. So I'm aware that those pupils aren't participating, and I can check on them directly.